The biggest false sense of security that I see is that companies believe they're too small to be hacked, when in fact there's a lot of automation involved in hacking these days, and the automation does not care what size your company is. You are just as vulnerable as a Fortune 500 company.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast series, Tech Made Human. This is episode 3. Today, we are talking about security, which really shouldn't be a surprise, but more specifically, we're talking about security that small businesses can start to implement or some steps that they can start taking right now. Cybersecurity isn't always about being unhackable. It's about downtime. It could be about losing value trust with your customers or your employees. And it's also about not getting totally wiped out. So most incidents really don't start with this movie style hacker, right? That we kind of imagine in our heads or see in movies. They just start with one account, one click, or just a bad Tuesday, right? I mean, it could really come out of nowhere. Today, though, we are walking through some moves that actually do change the outcomes for small businesses without turning you into a complete IT department. But I'm really excited today. We have our guest. His name is Carlo DeCumos. He is our Director of Managed Services. And y'all, he's got a ton of knowledge that I can't wait to share or have him share with y'all. Carlo, do you want to introduce yourself real quick? And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Marissa. Hi, I'm Carlo DeCumos. I am the Director of Managed Services with AIS. I have nearly 30 years experience in the higher ed industry, specifically in the managed services provider sector. And as you can imagine, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, cybersecurity should always be at the top of the list for topics to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carlo, if you're ready, let's dive right in.
Sure.
This is kind of a funny way to get started, but let me get your take on this. When the average Joe or when people hear the word cybersecurity, what do you typically think they picture? And then what do you wish that they would picture when they hear about cybersecurity?
That's a great question, Marissa. I think you were spot on in your intro because most people do see cyber threats as folks in hoodies in a basement somewhere or nation states who are the bad threat actors out there in the world. What I wish they would picture, however, are the everyday business controls that help mitigate cyber attacks, meaning logins, computer updates, operating system updates, and backups, because that's where the attacks actually start.
No, absolutely, Carlo, and I'm definitely guilty of that as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. What is, though, a realistic goal for an SMB? Is it really to just stop everything or reduce odds and limit damage? I mean, how should you really go about that?
Sure, I think one of the most important things you can do, because you're not going to stop everything, that's impractical and unrealistic, but you want to maintain in your organization a heightened sense of awareness around cybersecurity. And should something bad happen, you want to reduce the odds of it happening, and you want to limit the radius, the blast radius, if something does happen, so that you can control the outcomes and help with mitigation and recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of hinted at downtime. No one has time for any downtime. So that's really just, that's not something that we can really count on. What do you think is the most dangerous false sense of security that you've seen even lately?
Sure. So the biggest false sense of security that I see is that companies believe they're too small to be hacked, when in fact there's a lot of automation involved in hacking these days, and the automation does not care what size your company is. You are just as vulnerable as a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of staying on this topic, what would be one security myth that you would just love to see retire?
Sure. So I wish the myth of security is something you buy in a box rather than being a series of good habits to help mitigate security risks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Okay, Carlos, so you've got a lot of knowledge and you're a very trusted source, especially in this industry. I want to know from you if you could kind of put together like a short list of maybe 5 to 7 moves that would actually change outcomes. So how do you decide which of these would make a cut, would make the cut?
Sure. Instead of giving you a list, I'll just give you a general statement. If it reduces real world risk quickly, even when people make mistakes, it makes the list. There are numerous security controls out there that exist today. And if it works, then that's what you use.
Okay, that makes sense. Easy enough. What's really your test for something that would be high impact versus just noise?
Sure. I would say that does it stop the common attacks occurring today? Or does it just look good on paper in checklist format and you're just checking boxes to pass an audit, for instance?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we do get caught up sometimes with a lot of things, just kind of checking and moving on, and we're really not either fully uncovering a problem or fixing it with a real solution. So that's a very good point. What do you really see as like a really big distraction that SMBs tend to chase from your experience, and how that really doesn't do them much good?
Sure. I think through no fault of their own and by them being chased by aggressive sales folks, they tend to be exposed more to fancy tools, again, coming out of a box, versus focusing on the basics like multi-factor authentication, patching, and backups.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up multi-factor identification because we're going to get there in a minute. I do wanted to ask you because Carlo, this stuff is overwhelming, and I know you understand that, but you're the guru in this, right? So when you're talking and we're working with SMB owners or just employees, it's just overwhelming. There's so much about cybersecurity and what we need to invest in and what we shouldn't invest in, and how do we know if things are working. If someone is overwhelmed in this moment and they're saying, I don't really even know where to begin, where should they start?
Sure. You should always start with identity management, meaning you want to make sure that you have multi-factor authentication on all of your critical accounts.
Okay, so I want to kind of move to maybe a little scarier question, but it's important that we talk about it because there's a lot of instances where businesses get themselves into like a business-ending incident. And it seems like it always starts with, well, someone just got into an account, and it seems kind of basic. So why do so many business-ending incidents kind of start with this?
Because the threat actors know that once they've compromised an account and they are in the environment, they don't need to hack anymore. They have access to all of your systems, so everything just opens up for them easily.
Wow, that is scary. So what really is like the chain reaction, I guess, once the attacker has access? I mean, it seems pretty quick, right? And easy to do.
Yeah, sure. So with email being the most compromised threat vector out there, it usually starts with a nefarious email where a user will click on a link or open an attachment to that email. From there, the threat actor gets in, resets all the passwords that they can, then they get access to all of the financial systems, and then from there, it's either data theft or ransomware.
Geez, yeah, that does happen really quick. Which accounts are, or would you say, are like the master keys in most businesses?
It'll be your email administrative accounts, your global administrators, finance users, and anyone with broad access up to and including your IT staff.
So does this mean, Carlo, that potentially these people that do have master access should be even more trained or more aware of, these threats? Because really, they're kind of the front line here in terms of someone getting through or past them.
Sure, most certainly. Because of their elevated level of access, compromise of those accounts bring a higher risk to the organization.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's where, there's a big part of cybersecurity is just training, and making sure that people are equipped to spot things when something is off, which leads me to what is kind of like early warning signs that something might just be a little off in terms of cybersecurity? I mean, are you getting weird emails? Are you starting to see, what's an early warning sign of this?
Sure, you may see logins on these accounts that occur during odd hours, right in the middle of the night. Or you might have those folks unable to log in because, unbeknownst to them, their passwords have been changed by the threat actor. So those are two big ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? That really means that this is a company-wide initiative. Everybody kind of needs to be eyes wide open on this, to be observant of things like this and patterns like this.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, Carlos. So I kind of want to start to really dive in. You've given some great background and kind of just the overall gist of what we're talking about here. I wanted to start talking about some moves that businesses can make. So you just had previously mentioned multi-factor authentication. So we're going to abbreviate that to MFA. Why is MFA now a total non-negotiable for SMBs?
Sure, over the years, technology has become such that passwords are easily broken. MFA turns stolen passwords into dead ends because now you have two means of authentication that must be used to gain access to systems.
So this is kind of typical when one of your accounts will first ask for, like a login password, and then it might be followed by, a question about yourself, like, your grandmother's maiden name or something like that. So it's just a second form of security, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Where should an SMB turn on MFA first?
Sure, email for sure. Email systems, remote access, administrators. Those are always the first three, but I'd say the most critical out of all of those is email first.
Okay, and then kind of on the flip, where do you see the most common MFA mistakes that still leave people exposed and they might not even know it?
Sure. One of the big ones we find is that the executives of the company want to be excluded because using multi-factor authentication is a inconvenience. Using SMS only for authentication and then allowing the Remember Me Forever feature for your passwords. Those are the most common MFA mistakes.
But what's more inconvenient
Yes,
is
a compromise.
So we're going to keep sticking with MFA here, and I want to know from your perspective, what is your most simplest, most human explanation of why MFA is worth like the friction?
Sure, I'll use a very simple analogy. MFA is the seatbelt. It's annoying until the crash.
Okay, so it's, kind of one of those things where you're being proactive.
Yes, absolutely. You must be proactive. It's not physical safety, but it is safety and security for your data in your company.
Okay, and speaking of company, people can be stubborn. So what would be, or how does one necessarily roll out an MFA plan for those employees that just don't want to do it? Like you said earlier, some executives just don't want to do it. It might take a little bit more time for them to log into things or have to change their password every 30, 60, 90 days. So what are we doing if people revolt, Carlo?
Sure. So communication is key. Explain to the employees why MFA is important. And it is essential to success that the executives of the company have buy-in and they exercise the leadership to implement MFA. You could also offer an app-based MFA solution, meaning an authenticator that you can have on your phone that'll send you a number and you plug that in and you're authenticated.
So that authenticator would be a little bit more automatic and kind of do most of the work for you in a way?
Yes, absolutely. And once you start doing it, it's just like authenticating to your bank account through an app or your utility company. They all use MFA now to some degree. So it should be nothing new for anyone. It's just now in your workplace.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I always feel better when I have to use MFA, especially with my apps or, that have to do with like my banking or things like that. I want to feel like, I'm given the option for someone to make it harder for someone to hack in,
Sure.
I want to talk about shared logins. Why are they still common? I mean, it's crazy that, they're kind of quietly brutal and some, what if something goes wrong? Why are people still sharing their logins with each other,
Sure, but using shared logins is convenient, and that's the biggest reason companies do that. But then it becomes problematic when no one knows who did what because they're sharing a login.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you this. However, I kind of have a feeling you're going to say all three of these. I was going to ask, what do shared logins break first? I mean, are we talking about accountability, visibility, or recovery?
I'd say all three. Those are the things. You lose accountability because you don't know who is in the system at any given time doing what. There's little visibility because if someone does not confess to accessing the system, you may never know. And recovery always comes last because you've had so much access using the same credentials.
Sure. Okay. So what are we doing in a situation like this? How are we breaking? I mean, really, it's kind of turned into a bad habit. How are we kind of breaking this cycle of shared logins?
Sure, you must create individual logins first. That is the first most important thing to do, and phase out the shared ones because obviously when you do that, you're going to affect business operations, which you want to minimize, but you also want to keep yourself safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your opinion, if businesses refuse to kind of change their ways today when it comes to shared logins, what would you say the least bad mitigation would be, if any?
Sure, the least bad one, I guess, would be to rotate your passwords frequently, meaning change the passwords periodically and log access so that when anyone uses a shared credential, you know who and when it was used. But it's still very, very risky.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about another step or another big kind of thought process that these businesses need to start thinking about if they're not already. And that has to do with offboarding. Why is this such a safety issue? And why is it also not so much an HR issue? And also too, Carlo, I want you to touch on how many of us work remote too. I'm certainly remote, and you've got to think about offboarding for that too. Why is it so important that we have these safety policies in place, and what safety issues could arise if we don't?
Sure. So whenever an employee leaves a company, whether it be on good terms or not, it's a real-time security risk because they still have all of the access they had when they were employees. And it's not just a formality. It is an actual step that must be in both the HR and IT checklist for offboarding employees.
Okay, so what would you say like the very first step should be? Are we talking about we're cutting off your email, or are we taking you off our group, our Teams channel or our Slack channel? I mean, what to you would be the kind of the first step to do in this situation?
Sure. So whenever we know that an employee is going to depart an organization, execution must be immediate, and it should start with your email, any VPN access, multi-factor authentication, and any administrative access. Later, you can determine whether or not file ownership is needed or not, because the new employee may need the same files or access to the emails of the outgoing employee.
Okay, so who should own this process? I mean, who needs to say this is my job, and they're trusted to kind of step up and do this every time an offboarding process begins?
Sure, it's a shared responsibility. IT for sure, because they have the keys to the kingdom and they will actually execute on disabling accounts. But the trigger for that must always come from HR because offboarding employees is an HR event.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think is the most common offboarding miss? They're maybe just not acknowledging it, or they don't know that this is something they should be paying attention to?
Sure, since many employees use a laptop or a desktop and a cell phone, it's easy to forget to turn off access from all of those devices. And any multi-factor authentication tokens that they have also need to be disabled so that they can't access any systems from a different device.
I didn't even think about that because, especially for me, I'm sure for you too. I mean, I can work off of my cell phone, I can work off of my iPad, I can work off of my laptop. I mean, I'm connected with the company in 100 different ways.
Sure.
So it's definitely important to remember, that part of it as well.
Absolutely.
So, Carlo, I want to move into another step that small businesses can start to take a look at when it comes to security. And we're going to talk about patching. And I first would like you to really explain what that means. And then I also kind of want you to talk about, potentially the quote of people saying, well, we update our system sometimes. And that still probably leaves businesses exposed.
Sure, absolutely. So patching and security updates are just that. It's when your operating system or other systems receive updates that the manufacturers will actually push out to you to counter any defects in functionality, and especially for security updates will help mitigate against threat actors and cyber attacks. Why sometimes that's not a good strategy because attackers will always exploit the one thing that you did not update.
So let me ask you this. Do we need to also be aware, although we will typically get automatic updates from whether it's our computer or our phone, are there still updates that we just need to look for and potentially be more of a manual process? I mean, can we always count on automations coming through and telling us when to update?
Sure, most folks worry most about their operating systems, right? That's the biggest thing that's automatically patched by whomever you're using. But not all updates can be automated. However, there'll be some manual updates and patches that you will need to do. For instance, your web browsers, any plugins, firmware, and especially third-party apps or line of business apps that a company might use. They all will receive updates from time to time, and you need to be on the lookout for those and not just rely on automatic updates, which is typically only for your operating systems.
So let me play devil's advocate here for a minute, and I want to ask, I'm sure you hear, patching. It's the thing that breaks everything, right? Or, have you ever noticed when you do some sort of software update, things tend to operate differently, maybe for a little while, or, especially us as busy SMBs, we don't want to have a halt or a stop to our workday. So, how do you kind of avoid patching being the thing that breaks everything?
Sure, and that's not uncommon. Many IT organizations will delay pushing out patches just for that reason because updates and patches have known to break whatever they're trying to update. So they want to make sure that it works out in the wild before applying it to their own company, which makes sense because you don't want to bring everyone down when you're trying to fix everyone, right, and keep them safe. But what you can do is test small. So you can apply patches or updates to a small subset of your users to make sure functionality is not affected. And then you can stage the update so that you're only doing portions of your company at a time, just so that you don't lose functionality should something go wrong. And patch regularly, but not in a panic mode, but be methodical and meaningful and intentional about applying patches and updates.
Okay, so another move that small business owners can think about taking is when we talk about backups. And Carlo, you probably know this all too well, but what do business owners think they have that isn't actually a backup, which could be kind of scary?
Sure, and that's not uncommon. So a lot of small business owners believe that file syncing is backup, which it is not, right? Either to OneDrive or SharePoint. The SharePoint or OneDrive syncs will save your data at the moment, but it is not a file backup. That is a point in time where you can go back months, weeks or months to recover your data. It's only a snapshot. So you need a formal backup system to back up your files and not rely on file syncing.
And can you get your IT team to kind of help you navigate that? Or what if you're just a little unfamiliar with how to properly back something up?
Sure. Backups are very common. Most IT shops understand what the importance of that and will have a product that they offer. In our case, it's Datto. And not only can we back up your data, we can also, if you get compromised, we could run your business off of your backup until the incident is remediated on your on-prem systems. So we take that very seriously. And one of the most forgotten steps in actually implementing a true backup solution is restoring from backup. It's great if you've backed up all of your files, but if you have not exercised bringing it back down and restoring from it, it really does you no good. At best, you're delayed in resuming business. At worst, you can't do it, and you're very delayed in resuming business.
So it is kind of a two-part process, right? So first, you do need to ensure that you're backing up even beyond just files. Once they back up everything that would be appropriate to back up, then you kind of go into a next phase, which would be actually restoring what you backed up. And I mean, do people kind of forget to do that?
Yes, that is a very big problem out there in the wild in not practicing restoration from backup.
Can you test restoring things? Like, can you see if it's something that's working, or how do you kind of How are you certain that you're able to restore?
Sure. As a former CIO, I would actually exercise this every month, and you don't have to do a large scale backup of all of your systems. Do a couple of mailboxes, restore a few files across different systems periodically to make sure that you can restore the information you're looking for from your backup across different systems.
And I just want to make this point clear again. It's just got me thinking, this is all stuff that we need to be doing to stay proactive, right? Because in the instance, it's kind of an if and when thing, your company is jeopardized security wise. Backups and restoring and all that, sometimes that just doesn't matter. If you don't take these steps now, it just makes it so hard to come back from a catastrophe.
It absolutely is. I mean, even if it's a natural disaster where all of your equipment is destroyed in a tornado, or if it's ransomware, that's a big one. If you don't have your data backed up somewhere, you're at the mercy of the folks who are holding you ransom, and you may have to pay a large sum of money to get your information back. And obviously, that's not ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so another step that small businesses really need to continue to look at or just start looking at is when we talk about phishing, and not the kind with, fish and bait, phishing with a PH, and then also smishing and vishing. And sometimes these cyber tactics are really hard to spot. So I want to first talk about phishing and why does phishing, and if you want to briefly explain what it is, but why does this still work on people that know what it is and we're educated and we're experienced on this? Why do these tactics and hacks still work?
So, phishing essentially is receiving emails from someone you're meant to believe is from your company, usually high in rank. And it's effective because it uses social engineering to play on people's emotions. So it's not necessarily targeting your intelligence, however, it is targeting your emotions. And that's why it still works.
Attacks like this really do play with your emotions. I think that that's when we talk about training and how important being proactive and making sure your employees are trained. I know that our training that we do each month, we're put through a series of examples and we have to spot what parts of an email are suspicious or if we would report something as phishing. I would like to think that that does help all of us to kind of just continue to become familiar with these tactics. Do want to ask you about phishing. What's one behavior that reduces risk immediately?
Well, you have to pause before you click. We're so busy in our jobs, and you're processing emails in your inbox, and you get in such a hurry, you may miss the red flags of a phishing email, even if they're very obvious. So slow down and pause before clicking, especially if you're under a timeline pressure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Moving a little bit into smishing and vishing, I want to ask you if you could think of potentially a believable example that listeners would recognize. So these are more so like phone and text scams. Um, I know that personally, when I get a text from somebody, and sometimes it could say like my bank, it is kind of believable. And I'm sure you have an example of that as well.
So, a believable example is a quick text from your CIO asking you to purchase gift cards, right? That's one of the oldest ones in the book, but that is a clear example of how threat actors will use text messages to gain your trust and influence you to do what it is they want you to do.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say, like more of like a verification rule that maybe every business should adopt for either money or account changes or anything in that financial realm?
Sure. The best way to do that is to not immediately respond. Don't make any financial transactions until you can verify the authenticity of that message with the person that you know who would normally send that. You could call your CEO, you could call your CFO to validate whether or not the request is legitimate or not, and that's probably the best way to mitigate risks for phishing.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaway here, and you said it, is just pause, right? I mean, no one's dying in a fire. So let's just take a minute, evaluate what was sent to us, and then reach out to the appropriate person to either verify or not, if something like this is real. So, Carlo, we're going to begin to wrap up a little bit here. I'm going to ask you two kind of final questions. And unfortunately, we do have to touch on things that if you are hacked or if you do have a security breach, and I want to know, put yourself in the position, after the first hour that something has gone wrong. What truly separates the businesses that can kind of contain the problem and start to react versus businesses that immediately spiral? And I think that kind of leads into, the decisions. Like, what are those first 2 or 3 decisions that a business should make in this instance?
Sure. So you want to first make sure you are quick in your response. Even if it's a false positive, you want to respond quickly so that you can ascertain what exactly is happening. And you want clarity on the situation. Know as best you can what is happening and not panicking, because people will make bad decisions when they panic. The first things I would want to do is contain the access, isolate systems you believe have been compromised. If you have indeed been compromised, you want to make sure that the footprint of that compromise is kept as small as possible and contained. You want to preserve any evidence, because based on the nature of the compromise, you will definitely have law enforcement involved as part of the investigation. And call the right help. Know who to call. Your IT department. Leadership, they will need to know what's going on. Your legal counsel, your insurance company for sure, and your MSP, who is normally your IT department. You want to make sure that the insurance company, it sounds like an odd first step, but they will often have a third-party forensics team that will come in and take over the forensics and remediation of your compromise.
Okay, that's helpful to know that, if you could potentially put together, like an easy contact list of, hey, here's the people we need to let know of what happened. Here's how we can all kind of work together and we'll kind of move through this, the best way that we can. And Carlo, you did bring up a good point. You did bring up contacts such as insurance. And I do want to make a point that in our podcast episode number 2, we talk heavy about cybersecurity insurance. There's a lot of very, very eye-opening points that we make in there, and just the fact that some people think they have insurance for cybersecurity and they don't. So I would encourage all of you to also take a listen to that. That is on our YouTube IT help channel.
Yes, I would agree. Verify that you do have cyber insurance. It's critical in today's business, and also when it comes to responding to cyber events, it's very helpful to have a response checklist, and then it takes a lot of the decision making out of your response. You know what to do, who to call, and how to proceed should you get compromised.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to being proactive instead of reactive. I think it's just you're setting yourself up for a little bit more success there. I do want to ask you, for listeners who have really digested a lot of this information, how would you recommend or suggest maybe 3 things that they could potentially start to do in the next 30 days that would really enhance their current security processes, or things that they just kind of need to start, talking to other team members about? What would be some of those things?
Sure, I think the main things are to think about immediately are identity management, backups, and updates. If you were to have something to start on today, turn on your MFA for your email. That's a great start. In your first week, you could verify your backups actually restore. And then as you're planning out into the future, you can create an offboarding and incident response plan for your company that will help you remember to do all of the smart things as you're going through these activities.
Yeah, that makes total sense. There's definitely a process to it. And even if you're taking baby steps, at least you're taking steps. And Carlos, so is this something, you talk about MFA, or you talk about potentially just doing maybe even like longer processes to help some businesses stay secure? Is this something that an IT provider like yourself, director of IT, could help you with? Do you need your own IT team, or who could really help kind of get the ball rolling for some of these small businesses?
So yes, an MSP, as an MSP, we certainly provide that security service for our clients, and it will alleviate the headaches of a client who, especially those who do not have an IT department internally, have deal with the threats of compromising in the cybersecurity arena without having to think about it. We'll do all of that for you.
Awesome. So I think really the biggest part of that is make sure you're vetting a potential MSP. And hey, we even have blogs on that on our Learning Center. So check those out. Carlo, before I let you go, I want to give you maybe one or two curveball questions. I just want to get your initial reaction. Again, you know so much. This is just fascinating to me. I want to know, what's the most expensive small shortcut that you've seen? So something people did to save time, but probably cost them a lot later on.
Sure. I would say probably one of the biggest ones is sharing accounts, sharing credentials, especially if you don't assign credentials with elevated access to only specific people who need that access, rather making everyone, for instance, a domain administrator. That is a shortcut, and it can be very risky and expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, which security habit, I guess, do most people resist the most? Or what do you hear about the most when it comes to resistance or just saying, that's not important to us?
Sure. The biggest one is probably password complexity. You all know now when you create passwords for different systems, even if it's your bank or whomever you do business with, they want 12 characters, special characters, a certain amount of numbers and capital letters. That's one of the biggest complaints we get, that and multi-factor authentication. And it's interesting because it's an inconvenience, right, for the typical user to comply with those security controls. However, if they get compromised, the first thing they'll say is, well, you didn't do enough to protect me.
Yeah, I can see that. I can totally see that. To wrap this up, Carlo, you have been a wonderful guest. I really feel like I could talk to you all day about this stuff, and will certainly be having you back. I do want to say a couple things that I've just kind of reflected, or reflecting on, is that cybersecurity just isn't one big project, and you made that very clear, and that it is processes, it is steps. There, it could mean there's a lot of people involved. It's a lot of communication, and it really can help you if you put all these things in place. It can really help save your business. If you're not sure where you stand, like where you stand with accounts or backups, or even like you mentioned, what to do in the first hour if something happens. Once you're able to kind of find a direction for those answers and figure out the path for that really will change the outcome of how your business can handle an unfortunate cybersecurity attack, or just make you more aware of if something is coming. But Carlo, thank you so much. Carlo, where can we find you? Are you on LinkedIn? We want to get to know you more.
I am on LinkedIn, absolutely.
Awesome. And for the viewers out there, this video is on YouTube. It's on our IT Help channel. So feel free to subscribe to that channel and check out our other videos. And we thank you guys for listening and being here, and we will see y'all in the next episode.